Forge! Gang! Let's go! Alright, so I want to make a crucial, important message about a future war with the Russians. A potential World War III scenario with the Russians in Eastern Europe. So, you have probably been hearing on the mainstream media, the conventional news media, that the heroic Ukrainians have been fighting back successfully against the Russians and all this crap. Bullshit. The Russians are winning. The Ukrainians are a very proud, patriotic people, but they're losing the war. 30,000 Ukrainians die every single month. 1,000 Ukrainians die every single day. 70,000 to 46,000 Ukrainians have died. Around 30 to 50,000 or 60,000 Russians have died. So do understand that right now, what is going on in Europe is very crucial. Lithuania has closed off its rails to Kaliningrad. So, Lithuania used to have a rail line that went through it to Kaliningrad and the rest of Russia. This allowed for Russia to carry freight to Kaliningrad. Lithuania has stopped that. Lithuania has cut off that rail line. And Lithuania and all of the Baltic states have mustered their armies on the borders with Belarus and with Russia. Poland is preparing to actually do a peacekeeping mission into Lviv. So, the situation is getting very serious. The Germans, of all people, are talking about building up their armed forces. The Germans, of all people, of all of the Europeans, the Germans, the most pacifist people, are actually starting to modernize and buy weapons and stuff from the United States. There is a war that is about to break out between Russia and Lithuania and Poland. Ukraine is not a NATO state, but Poland and Lithuania are. If any NATO state is attacked, all of NATO is tasked to respond, and the United States always sends in the bulk of its armed forces. If America gets into a war with Russia, a land war, America will get its ass kicked. America will be seen by the rest of the world as the bitch that it is. Americans are not prepared for any war. This is serious, Eric the Ghost. I don't have time for your nonsense. This is serious. America will lose a third world war with Russia and China should it ever escalate to that point. Russia, China, and America all have nuclear weapons. And the Russians have said that they will not use nuclear weapons as a proxy. But America, Washington, has not done that. If America uses nuclear weapons against the Russians, there will be immediate retaliation. All of the major American cities will be wiped out. Russian cities will be wiped out as well, and so will Chinese cities. But the point being is that America is going to get nuked. Half of its population will be hit with nuclear fallout radiation, gamma radiation from a nuclear fallout. It will be blown to shit in a mushroom cloud. Blown to shit in a mushroom cloud. Millions will die. This will create a nuclear winter. It will trigger a nuclear winter because all of that fallout radiation stuff will go into the atmosphere. Most of the world's population is not prepared for the full-on consequences of this point. Americans are not trained. They have not been trained for over 20 years for fighting a conventional enemy. The U.S. Armed Forces have only trained to fight terrorism and to do counter-terrorism missions, fighting Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and so forth. And you saw last year how badly that turned out in Afghanistan. America embarrassed itself on a global stage when it lost Afghanistan to the Taliban, or to the new Taliban. America embarrassed itself on the international stage. America is repeating the same mistakes. Joe Biden is repeating the same arrogant mistakes. He is going to start World War III. The Third World War is going to happen if this is not stopped. The escalation is going to be catastrophic. It will have catastrophic results for thousands and thousands of years to come. Civilization may never fully recover. Now, America probably will not lose as bad in World War III as Germany did in the Second World War. But things are pretty bad right now. The economic deterioration, the housing shortage, the poverty, the rise in prices with inflation. The rising inflation in the United States is terrible. The economy is in a downward spiral. It could actually very well collapse or go into a full-on meltdown. We are seeing the end of neoliberalism. The neoliberal order that was started by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, that is coming to an end. It's not the end of capitalism, it is just the end of neoliberalism as it existed at the end of the Cold War, the post-Cold War period. So we are seeing the end of the age of globalism, and we are seeing new countries like Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, South Korea, Iran, especially Iran, Russia and China and Pakistan coming on to the world stage and directly competing with Europe and with North America. These are the new countries that are going to have a tremendous and massive influence on the world stage in the future. Nigeria will also probably join, and so will Brazil. So, now China does not have a full aircraft carrier fleet. They only have 3 aircraft carriers. But it has the second largest aircraft carrier fleet. It is also named their latest aircraft carrier Shenzhen, which is right across from Taiwan. The Chinese want the island of Taiwan. The Russians want eastern and southern Ukraine, and they are going to take it. They will take it. They are determined to take it, and they will take it. Just like America did in the 19th century with Manifest Destiny. If America and Poland and Lithuania and Taiwan and Japan and South Korea choose to go to war with China or Russia, they will get their asses whooped. America will be the beating dog of the world. America will be the whipping dog of Russia and China, because Americans do not know how to fight in combat. Americans have not had real hard combat experience since the Vietnam War. Since the Vietnam War, Americans have not prepared for hard combat. Americans do not want, most Americans do not probably want to fight a war in the Ukraine or in the Baltic Sea. I'm a hard man. That's a euphemism for homosexuals to identify themselves. Well, if that were true, Eric, if that were actually true, then PPP would be saying it all the time. But regardless, Russia would win in a land war against the United States. China would win a sea war or a naval war in the South China Sea with the United States. Belgium. Well, I don't think Eric realizes that Belgium is in NATO as well. So, Europeans are not going to fight America's proxy wars. Europeans are mad at Americans. They do not want to fight America's proxy wars. I guarantee you that the Europeans will sell out to Russia and China. There's already a lot of Chinese monetary influence in Europe. There's already a lot of Chinese monetary influence on the West Coast, in California, Oregon, and Washington, and in London and Paris. So, America, Poland, and Lithuania are not ready to fight a land war against the Russians. But regardless, Lithuania has cut off the rail links. Lithuania has cut off all of the rail links between the Kaliningrad Oblast Sea and the rest of mainland Russia. So now there's going to be potentially a war. Gonzalo Lara 2 on his channel has created a video that's called A Message to All Americans. He lives in Ukraine. He lives in the middle of Ukraine, and he sees for himself that Kiev is going to fall. He knows that the Russians are going to win, and probably the Poles, the Lithuanians, and the Americans will not get involved. More than likely, Joe Biden will play it smart. He's probably not going to push none of the NATO proxy countries into a war with Russia. And it will just continue in the Ukraine. I do think that Poland is going to actually go into Western Ukraine. I do think that's going to happen. Now, the Chinese and the Russians don't always agree on everything. The Chinese and Russians, they do infight a lot. Like, the Chinese were not pleased when Russia started an all-out war against Ukraine. But the reason why this war broke out was because the Ukrainian army was pushing 100,000 or 200,000 soldiers against Luhansk and Kharkov, Luhansk, and Donetsk. Those were separatist republics. The Donetsk, Kharkov, and Luhansk republics that separated and were going to join to Russia. The Ukrainian army, which was trained by America and NATO, 12,000 Ukrainians were trained by NATO and by the USA, built up a force on those separatist republics. That is when Russia responded by invading and thoroughly kicking the ass of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have had their asses handed to them. They have had boots stomped on them so hard, and all that land is going to go to Russia now. Now, all of eastern and southern Ukraine is going to be annexed into the Russian Federation because of that stupidity. If Lithuania, Poland, or the United States or Finland gets involved in this mess, it's going to lead to World War III. There will be a third world war, and America will lose that war to Russia. It will also lose economically to China. And what will happen after the United States loses the Third World War? It's going to break up. The United States is going to break apart. It is going to break apart into New England, the Midwest, the German Midwest, the breadbasket, Dixie, Yankeedom, the Midlands, or the Quaker Midlands, California, Texas, the Mormon Corridor, the Dakotas, the Pacific Northwest, Alaska, and Hawaii. America is going to divide and break apart into its constituent parts, because the American government will not be able to sustain the internal crisis and the internalized ethnic and class-based tensions. It will not be able to sustain itself. If America does pull itself into a war and loses, it's going to lose its international prestige. NATO is going to break apart, and Europe is going to go into a race war with the ethnic migrants, all of these Africans whose homes and whose countries have been destroyed and who have been broken up and have been made homeless because of wars and stuff. They're going to go to Europe. And Europe is going to fall apart. Like, the cities in Europe are going to burn. And it's going to be horrible. The streets of America are going to burn because there's going to be rioting and looting with Antifa and America First groups fighting each other on the streets. There is literally going to be tension between the governments and the people in the United States, in Canada, and in Europe, all over Europe, and Australasia. This is bad, people. America is not ready for a war with Russia. The Ukrainians might be, but Ukraine is losing pretty badly right now. But things are pretty bad. Who is the guy that made the Civil War documentary? Ken Burns. Last year, Ken Burns said that America is once again looking through the barrel of a gun. What he means by that is that America is back in the 1850s. America is looking through the barrel of a gun against its own people. In other words, America's own people are against themselves. Americans are going to be fighting against themselves. Americans do not see other Americans equally, and they are ready to fight other Americans because of just about anything. So this means that in addition to the potential of a world war, there could also be a civil war in the European Union and in the United States and in Canada. And that could spread into Africa, the Middle East, into Latin America, because right now the United States leads the world. If America collapses, it's going to have catastrophic effects to the entire world. The entire world is going to be deeply affected by the collapse of the American Empire. The British Empire is gone. The Soviet Empire is gone. The American Empire, potentially, in a war with Russia, will go. It will collapse and go. Not because it loses a war with Russia or with China, but because the people themselves will become sick of fighting a war for Hunter Biden and for Washington. The American people themselves will tear down and destroy the government itself and tear down the structure. And when that happens, there will be no police force, no military. There will just be mercenary bands, and they will just basically be murdering each other for resources. It's pretty bad. Pretty bad situation. But Joe Biden and the Democrats and the elites in Washington are the sort of people that will go to war with Russia in order to slow down an economic collapse. Just like what FDR did to halt the Great Depression. He got America in World War II and used the military and mobilization in the war to end the Great Depression. Joe Biden will do the same thing. To end the Depression or the economic downturn, he'll put America in a war with Russia in Eastern Europe, or with China in the South China Sea. Forge gang! Forge gang, people, let's go! I thought nuclear fallout would be a little bit more worse than a financial downfall. What is it actually going to be? It could be all of that. Pure hubris thinking America is in its prime. America reached its prime in the 1980s. After the 1980s, it just went down from there. No, we can't afford a war, dude. America is like $8 trillion or $9 trillion in debt. $9 trillion in debt. It's just, it'll fall apart if it does, bro. We cannot afford to go into a war with Russia. More than likely, because America does have a much more advanced and better fitted navy, America would win the war against China, the naval war. But in a land war with Russia, Americans would not be prepared. they would have to utilize their European allies in order to fight back. They would have to utilize their European proxy allies or Asian allies in order to fight. And America is not ready to do that. The only advantage that America has is that its technology is far more advanced than the Russians and the Chinese. So the military hardware is much more advanced, but it's also much more expensive to actually build and fit it on a mass scale. In other words, America would drown itself in even more debt having to build all of this advanced weaponry to fight the Russians. The Russians are much better trained. They don't have wokeness in their country. And this is another thing. The Russians and the Chinese are not woke. They don't have trannies and homosexuals in their armed forces. They don't have women on the front lines fighting like in the American army. When you have women and trannies and LGBTQ people on the front lines fighting the Russians, who do you think will win? Well, it's going to be the Russians. So the Russians will win, and the United States will probably first go into a total financial collapse, and then the country will start to break up. It won't happen immediately after it loses the war, but it will gradually happen. The loss of the gold standard and the rise of the feds. The federal government pushed the gold standard after the Civil War, Eric. America was not founded on the gold standard. In fact, actually, a lot of the agrarians and populists and socialists opposed the gold standard. The gold standard made the economy even more unstable than the current Federal Reserve fiat currency, actually. The military is full of Jannies these days. It really is, dude. Now, I don't think there's going to be a war. I think, personally, that America, Poland, and Lithuania will not try to trigger the Russians into a direct hot war. But instead, what probably will likely happen is that you will continue to see the NATO countries pushing and antagonizing the Russians as they try their best to isolate Russia more and more from the world. And Russia and China will be drawn closer with India in a more compact military bloc. So there's going to be more divisions into different military blocs, kind of like what happened before World War I, with all the different alliances and the different military blocs in Europe. It's going to be a lot like that. Japan, for example, is heavily remilitarizing. Like, the Japanese have a navy like they did before World War II now. Like, the Japanese have a fully updated army and navy, even though their constitution says they're not supposed to wage war for the benefit of nationalism. Every man does what is right in his own eyes, to quote the Book of Judges. Yes, bro, unfortunately, Americans are like the Midianites. Americans have become like the Midianites, and Americans are going to get annihilated in a third world war. So it's going to be pretty terrible. Now, America might probably come out of it, because I don't think the United States would collapse simply because of a war. I don't really think the United States is that weak, but I don't think that the American military is prepared to fight the Russians in a conventional war, because for the last 20 years, the American military have not been training for a conventional war. America has not been training for a real serious conventional war since 9/11, really since the end of the Cold War. So it'll be a tragic situation to see our boys in uniform dying in a war that they really do not want to be part of. The anti-Russian sentiment will be strong. The anti-Bolshevik or anti-Muscovite sentiment will be strong, but it won't last. It'll be a lot like Tsarist Russia in World War I fighting against Imperial Germany. It will trigger a revolution in America. It will trigger the American Revolution of 2027, bro. The American Revolution of 2028 or 2027, you know. And Donald Trump is not going to do anything either. Donald Trump is gone. Donald Trump failed his constituency, and I don't think that he'll be able to ever get reelected in 2024. So, the situation is pretty grim. I don't know what to say, man. Well, they can use shipping. Brilliant. There won't be war. Yeah, I hope there isn't war. China's a paper tiger, nothing to worry about, buddy. I don't think that you realize how much the Chinese have updated their military since Mao died. Like, in the last 10 years, 5-10 years, the Chinese have really updated and put in high-tech equipment into their military. They're not like the guerrilla warfare. They're not into the Maoist rebel guerrilla warfare that they did before. They're a very well-trained and highly professional force, like they were in the 30s when they were fighting the Japanese. It's a bad situation. There's really no telling where the stage of world history will next turn, but if the British Empire could fall apart overnight, if the National Socialist German Empire could fall and collapse overnight, if the Soviet Empire could fall and crash overnight, who's to say that it could not also happen to the American Empire? America is not invincible. Americans have not fought or have had real hard combat experience since Iraq and Afghanistan. We're not ready for this. We are not prepared to fight a conventional war with the Russians. More than likely, the Chinese will not push it yet. But they're looking for that chance. They're looking for that opening to take back Taiwan. They're looking for that. And they will probably eventually succeed in getting Taiwan. It is just the state of affairs, and only the brightest and smartest people who are able to see what is going on in the world with the influences of secret societies, the occult, and Freemasonry, the influences of Freemasonry and the Anglo-American establishment with the Rockefellers, the Fords, the Rothschilds, all of these families, these multi-billionaires and these technocrats, and what they want to do with building up and constructing these smart Gnostic cities. This is the end goal. This is actually the ultimate end goal, is to build a globalist structure that is built upon the technocratic smart city. This is what Francis Galton Darwin wrote in his The Next Million Years, or The Next 100,000 Years, back in 1968. The top 1% do not want the world to remain as it is. They want us to live like in Brave New World, addicted to drugs and to sex. never really having real sex, but only having like VR sex. Not procreating, but using artificial wombs, like in Brave New World. Not having families. Having perfectly created caste systems like in ant hive society. Completely mechanical. With a bunch of distractions. Smart cities driven by the mercantile orders. That's what they want. And that is the main drive that these people are trying to go for. Absolute mercantile technocratic control. Chinese men are physically weaker than American men. That's because China is much more ingrained in the technocracy than the United States and the West is. Chinese society is more inherently totalitarian and more technocratic. They're already ahead of us in terms of achieving the technocracy. The training military personnel are put through will make the fact they've not fought a war in a while irrelevant. Well, China's not fought a war since the Sino-Vietnamese War in 1979, but the point being is that they want full technocratic control. They want to build a complete AI singularity and control over all human brains. All human brains. They want the entire human populace of Earth in smart cities, and they want their brains integrated into AI. They want people to have microchips in their brains, and they want everyone to be connected to the metaverse. AI singularity. Complete and total and absolute control. No religion, just spirituality. No individual distinct religion, just total complete spirituality and techno-organic or biotech stuff, and just complete and absolute AI singularity. That is the end goal of the technocrats anyways. And probably what's going to happen after that collapses, or the destruction of the smart high-tech cities, is probably like what happens in Dune. They're going to create genetically manipulated humans that have brains that are more evolved than the computers. They're going to destroy the smart cities and use, like what happened in the Time Machine with the Morlocks and the Eloi. They're going to genetically divide humans up into different species. And these new species will destroy the smart cities. And what I think will happen is it will be replaced by something like in the Time Machine with the Eloi and the Morlocks. And kind of like what happened in Dune when they had genetically evolved or genetically manipulated people with giant brains that destroy the computers. I think that it will be out of that the system of the beast will arise. I think the system of the beast or the system of the Antichrist will rise up out of the collapse of this competition between the Morlocks and the Eloi. That's my personal take on the book of Revelations anyways, and what is going to transpire in the next several hundred years. The Eloi will be the inhabitants of the smart cities. Yeah, that's what I think, Rick Perry. I think the beast, I believe the system of the beast will arise from the Eloi. I think that the Antichrist and the beast will evolve or genetically evolve or be genetically designed and manipulated out of the Eloi of the smart cities once the smart cities are destroyed. the Morlocks will be the threat to keep us in. Yeah. So basically, the outcasts, the people that did not accept to join in the way of life, and were basically forced to live in like a primitive lifestyle. Kind of like how the Bushmen and Amazonian Indians live today, basically, is what the Morlocks will be doing. So it's a pretty grim future, you know. It's a future that is full of wondrous inventions and amazing scientific breakthroughs, but it is a future where there is no God and there is no religion. The people in the smart cities will not be Christian unless they are in organized underground cells, or unless they operate in underground cells. They will be forced to worship a almost Buddhist-like religion of sorts, a completely disorganized, pantheistic religion in which science and spirituality is integrated. Gnosticism, scientific and technical advancement is completely integrated. And it's, that's going to be the future. It almost sounds like a Final Fantasy game in a way. But that's where things are going to go. Our civilization is going to fall apart and collapse in war, and financial and nuclear catastrophic collapse. And then the smart cities, the Gnostic smart cities will arise and replace that. Then they will be destroyed and replaced by new breeds of humans, like the Eloi and the Morlocks. And it will be out of that in which the system of the beast of the end times will arise. So anyways, we got to make sure to not allow this to happen. Don't allow for Satan to destroy and ruin us. Do not allow for the church to fall under Satan, basically. Keep the devil at bay. This is not the future that has to be. It can always change. We're not in this dark future yet. We're here in the present, and we can make a change. We can help wake people up and bring them to Jesus Christ, and bring them to the message of the gospel. And we can affect change and slow down the descent to this pantheistic, Gnostic, hermetical, mercantile run, Judaic run smart cities. It doesn't have to be this way. But if nothing is done, then this is how things are going to go. But regardless of what sort of a system the Antichrist arises in, what sort of a system that the devil runs the world, in the end, the Savior, the Messiah, will appear in the heavens, and he will kill and trample down the beast with a sword in his mouth. The word of the gospel will win through in the end. And the sword that transpires out of the mouth of the Son of Man will smite the dragon. And there will still be a new Jerusalem and a resurrection of the remnant of the flock of the church. Thank you for watching.